The transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the jungle planet called Verdania Prime. Jake Martinez felt his stomach drop as the ship's engines shut down. Through the small window, he could see thick green plants everywhere. Tall trees reached up to the sky, and vines hung down like twisted ropes. The air looked thick and wet, even from inside the ship. Jake was 20 years old and the only human at the Galactic Military Academy. He had worked hard for 3 years to get to this point. Now he faced his final test. If he passed, he would become an officer in the Galactic Fleet. If he failed, he would go back to Earth with nothing to show for his time. The ship's door opened. With a loud hiss, hot, wet air rushed in, making Jake's clothes stick to his skin right away. He grabbed his small pack and followed the other cadets outside. The jungle smelled of rotting leaves and flowers. Strange bird calls echoed from the trees above. Instructor Veltar waited for them on the landing pad. The big alien looked like a cross between a lizard and a bear. His gray skin had thick scales, and his yellow eyes seemed to see everything. He wore the dark blue uniform of the Academy with pride. 3 silver bars on his chest showed his high rank. "Listen well, cadets," Veltar said in his deep voice. "This is your final survival test. You have 48 hours to build a shelter that will keep you safe from the weather. You can only use things you find on this planet. No technology beyond. Basic tools." Jake looked at his 3 classmates. They were all different types of aliens, and each one was much smarter than most humans. At least, that's what everyone said. Cricksha stood to Jake's left. She looked like a person made of clear crystal. Her body caught the sunlight and threw rainbow colors everywhere. She came from a desert planet where her people built amazing cities from pure crystal. Everything they made had perfect shapes and clean lines. Next to her was Nagram. He was huge, maybe 8 feet tall, and looked like a giant ant that walked on 2 legs. His black shell shined in the sun. 4 arms stuck out from his body, each one strong enough to lift a small car. His people lived underground in tunnels that stretched for miles. They all shared one big mind that told them what to do. The last cadet was Zelathy. She had blue-green skin that always looked wet. Long fins grew from her arms and legs. Her people lived in the oceans of their world, building beautiful cities from coral and sea plants. She needed to keep her skin wet, so she carried a small spray bottle that she used every few minutes. "Each of you will work alone," Veltar continued. "No help from others. No sharing of materials. The planet's weather can change fast, so your shelter must be strong. Rain, wind, and even hail are possible." Jake felt worried. His classmates had natural skills for building. Cricksha could grow crystals with her mind. Nagram had the shared knowledge of millions of his people to guide him. Zelathy could shape plants like clay with her touch. What did Jake have? Just his human brain and 2 hands. "You have basic tools in your packs," Veltar said. "A knife, some rope, and a small shovel. Nothing else. The test starts now. Good luck." The other cadets rushed off right away. Cricksha headed for a rocky area where she could find minerals to work with. Nagram went looking for soft ground where he could dig. Zelathy walked toward the sound of running water. Jake stood still and watched them go. He felt lost. On Earth, humans had always been builders, but they used wood and stone and metal. Here, he could see nothing but plants. Thick vines hung everywhere. The ground was soft and muddy. Water dripped from every leaf. Finally, Jake started walking into the jungle. He moved slowly, looking at everything around him. The trees were huge, with trunks so wide that 10 people holding hands could not reach around them. Their roots spread out above the ground like wooden snakes. Moss covered everything in soft green blankets. Jake found a small clearing and sat down on a fallen log. He opened his pack and looked at his few tools. The knife was sharp but small. The rope was strong but short. The shovel could dig, but not very deep. How could he build anything with so little? He heard voices in the distance. His classmates were already working hard. He could hear Cricksha humming as she tried to grow crystals. The sound of Nagram digging echoed through the trees. Zelathy was singing a water song her people used when they worked. Jake felt pressure to start working too, but something made him stay still. He watched. A small bird landed on a branch above him. The bird had built its nest by weaving thin twigs together. It had not fought against the tree. Instead, it had used the tree's own branches to hold its home. A spider caught Jake's eye. It was building a web between two plants. The web was strong, but also flexible. When the wind blew, the web moved with it instead of breaking. The spider did not try to make the plants hold still. It worked with how they moved. Jake spent the rest of the first day just watching. He saw how water flowed down the trees and where it collected in pools. He noticed which plants bent in the wind and which ones broke. He watched how different animals made their homes. His classmates thought he was being lazy. When they passed by his clearing, they shook their heads. Cricksha told him he was wasting time. Nagram said humans were too slow to survive. Zelathy felt sorry for him, but did not offer help. As the sun set, Jake could see what his classmates had done. Cricksha had started growing a crystal dome, but it kept cracking in the wet air. Nagram had dug a deep hole, but water kept filling it up. Zelathy had found a stream and was trying to build walls from water plants, but they kept falling apart. Made a small fire and ate some food from his pack. He thought about what he had seen during the day. The jungle was not his enemy. It was a living system where everything worked together. The successful animals did not fight against the jungle. They found ways to use it. As darkness fell, strange sounds filled the air. Things howled and chirped and rustled in the trees. Jake felt small and alone. His classmates were safe in their partly built shelters, but he had nothing except his fire and his thoughts. He looked up at the stars through the canopy of leaves. Somewhere up there was Earth, where humans had learned to survive in every kind of place. They had lived in deserts and icelands and thick forests. They had not done it with perfect crystals or shared minds or magic plant powers. They had done it by watching and learning and adapting. Jake smiled for the first time since landing on Verdania Prime. He might not have the natural gifts of his classmates, but he had something else. He had the human ability to see patterns and find new ways to solve problems. Tomorrow, he would show them what that meant. The fire crackled as Jake settled down to sleep. Around him, the jungle hummed with life. He was no longer afraid of it. Instead, he was beginning to understand it. And understanding, he realized, was the first step to working with it instead of against it. In the distance, he could hear his classmates still working by lamplight, trying to force their familiar methods to work in this strange place. Jake closed his eyes and listened to the jungle's rhythm. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would begin to build. Jake woke up as the first light came through the jungle canopy. His body was stiff from sleeping on the ground, but his mind felt clear. The sounds of the jungle had changed from the night music to morning calls. Birds sang high in the trees, and insects buzzed around the flowers that opened with the sun. He could hear his classmates already working. The sound of Nagram digging came from the east. Cricksha's humming drifted from the rocky area to the north. Zelathy's water songs echoed from the stream nearby. They had all started early, trying to make up for the problems they faced yesterday. Jake rolled up his sleeping bag and ate a quick breakfast. Then he walked toward the sound of Crickshaw's work. He wanted to see how his classmates were doing. Maybe he could learn something from watching their struggles. He found Cricksha kneeling beside a half-built crystal dome. The structure was beautiful, with walls that sparkled like diamonds in the morning light. But Jake could see cracks running through the crystal. Some pieces had already fallen off and lay broken on the ground. Cricksha looked frustrated. Her crystal body was dim instead of bright, which Jake had learned meant she was upset. She kept touching the cracks with her fingers, trying to make them heal. But every time she fixed one crack, two more appeared somewhere else. "The air here is wrong," she said when she noticed Jake watching. "Too much water, too much heat. My crystals grow weak and break. On my world, the air is dry and clean. Crystals grow strong and last forever." Jake nodded. He could see the problem. Cricksha was trying to build the same way her people had always built. But this was not her world. The jungle's wet air worked against everything she knew how to do. "Maybe you could try using different materials," Jake suggested. "The jungle has lots of things that like being wet." Cricksha looked at him with surprise. "I am Zarian. We build with crystal. It is our way, our gift. I cannot use these soft, weak plants like some primitive being." Jake did not argue. He could see that Cricksha believed her way was the only right way. She would keep trying to make crystals work, even if they kept breaking. He left her to her work and went to find Nagram. The big insectoid had dug a hole deep enough to stand in. The walls were straight and smooth, carved with the mathematical precision that his people loved. But the bottom of the hole was full of muddy water. Nagram was using all four of his arms to scoop water out with his hands. But for every handful he removed, more water seeped in through the walls. His black shell was covered with mud, and his movements looked tired and slow. "The ground here is no good," Nagram said when he saw Jake. "Full of water and soft roots. On my world, we dig in hard clay that holds its shape. The tunnels stay dry for thousands of years. Here, everything falls apart." Jake looked at the hole. He could see watermarks on the trees around them. This low area flooded every time it rained. Nagram had picked the worst possible place to dig, but he had chosen it because it looked like the places his people preferred. "What if you built above ground instead?" Jake asked. Nagram's antenna twitched with annoyance. "Thrazak do not build above ground. We are tunnel makers, miners. We live in the deep places where it is safe and dark. I will make this work. I just need to dig deeper, find the good earth below." Jake watched as Nagram went back to digging. The hole got deeper, but it also filled with more water. The big alien was trapped by his own instincts. He could only think of solutions that his people had used before. Jake walked on to find Zelathy. She had built a framework of branches near the stream, trying to weave water plants between them. But the jungle plants were different from the sea plants she knew. They were stiff and brittle. When she tried to bend them, they snapped. When she tried to weave them, they would not hold together. Zelathy's blue-green skin looked pale with worry. She kept spraying herself with water from her bottle, but Jake could see she was running low. The stress was making her dry out faster than usual. "These plants are wrong," she said sadly. "They do not flow like kelp. They do not bend like seagrass. At home, I can sing to the coral and it grows where I need it. Here, nothing listens to my songs." Her shelter looked like a pile of broken sticks. Every time she added a new piece, something else fell down. She was trying to build an underwater structure on dry land, using materials that had never lived in the sea. "The jungle plants grow different," Jake said gently. "Maybe they need different songs." Zelathy shook her head. "I only know the water songs, the deep songs, the songs of tides and currents. These dry plants have no music in them." Jake left his classmates to their struggles and went back to his clearing. He sat on his log and thought about what he had seen. Each of his classmates was incredibly skilled, but they were all trying to force the jungle to work like their home. Worlds. They could not see past their own ways of doing things. He spent the morning walking through different parts of the jungle. He tested the strength of various vines by pulling on them gently. Some were strong like rope. Others were flexible, like rubber bands. Some were weak but grew in useful shapes. He found mud that was sticky and clay-like near the stream. In other places, the mud was loose and sandy. He collected samples of different types and tested how they behaved when mixed with water, when dried in the sun, and when combined with plant fibers. Jake also studied the trees more carefully. He saw how their roots spread out for stability, how their trunks were flexible enough to bend in storms, and how their branches divided the weight of their leaves. Every tree was an example of smart engineering that worked with natural forces. Instead of fighting them, as the day got hotter, Jake noticed how different parts of the jungle stayed cool. Areas with thick canopy stayed shaded. Places near water stayed moist and fresh. Spots where the breeze could flow stayed comfortable, even in the heat. By afternoon, rain clouds were building up in the sky. Jake could see them through gaps in the trees. The air felt heavy and electric. This was going to be a big storm, and it was coming soon. He checked on his classmates again. Cricksha had rebuilt her crystal dome 3 times, but it kept cracking. She was getting weaker each time. She used her power to grow new crystals. Now Graham had dug his hole so deep that he needed a ladder to get out, but it was still full of water. Zealothy had given up on her framework and was trying to hollow out a space under some large roots. But the work was going slowly. None of them were ready for a storm. Their shelters would not protect them from heavy rain and wind. But they were all too proud or too stuck in their ways to try something completely different. Jake went back to his clearing as the first drops of rain began to fall. He had spent 2 days watching and learning, while his classmates had spent 2 days struggling. Now he finally understood what he needed to do. The rain was starting to fall harder. Jake could hear thunder in the distance. Soon the real test would begin. His classmates had built with their minds stuck in the past, thinking only of their home worlds. But Jake was ready to build something new, something that belonged to this jungle world. He smiled as he pulled out his knife and began to cut his first vine. The storm was coming, but he was no longer afraid. He had learned the jungle's secrets, and now he would use them. The rain fell harder as Jake began his work. He had spent 2 days watching and learning, but now he had less than 20 hours left. His classmates thought he was crazy to start so late, but Jake knew something they did not. He was not going to fight against the jungle. He was going to join with it. Jake walked to a spot he had chosen carefully. 3 big trees grew close together, forming a natural triangle. Their roots spread out above ground, creating a small valley between them. Water flowed through this valley when it rained, but it flowed in a pattern Jake had studied. He would not try to stop the water. Instead, he would use it. He started by cutting long vines from the trees above. But he did not cut just any vines. He chose ones that were strong but flexible, like the ones he had seen birds use for their nests. Some were thin and bendy. Others were thick and sturdy. Each type had its own job to do. Jake began weaving the vines between the 3 trees. He did not make straight lines like Cricksha would have done. He did not follow a pattern from a book like Nagram would have used. Instead, he wove in curves and spirals, the way he had seen spider webs made. Work looked strange to anyone watching. Jake would weave a few vines, then step back and pull on them gently. He listened to the sounds they made. He felt how they moved when he pushed them. If something did not feel right, he would change it right away. Cricksha came by to watch during a break from fixing her broken dome. She looked at Jake's work and shook her head. "This makes no sense," she said. "There is no order, no plan. How will you know if it is strong enough?" Jake kept working as he answered. "I test it as I go. The vines tell me what they can do. I just have to listen." "Vines do not talk," Cricksha said. "Only crystal sings with true voice. These plants are silent and dumb." But Jake could hear what the vines were saying. When he pulled too hard, they made a stretching sound that warned him to be gentle. When he tied them too tight, they creaked in protest. When he wove them just right, they settled into place with a soft whisper that meant they were happy. Nagram came by next. He was covered in mud from his flooded hole, and his movements were slow with exhaustion. "Human," he said, "you waste time with decoration. Build walls, dig foundation, make structure that will last." Jake looked at Nagram's work through the trees. The big alien had given up on his hole and was now trying to build walls above ground. But he was still thinking like a tunnel digger. His walls were straight and thick, designed to hold back tons of earth. They were much too heavy for the soft jungle ground. Already, Jake could see them starting to sink and lean. "Your walls fight." "The ground," Jake said. "Mine will dance with the wind." Nagram's antennas twitched with confusion. Walls do not dance. Walls stand firm. Walls protect. But Jake was building walls that could bend without breaking. He wove the vines in loose patterns that could stretch and compress. When the wind blew, his walls would sway like trees instead of standing rigid like stones. Zelothy was the last to visit. She looked tired and sad. Her water bottle was almost empty, and her skin was starting to crack from dryness. She had made little progress on her shelter. The jungle plants still would not cooperate with her water songs. "I do not understand your method," she said quietly. "It looks like the random growth of coral, but coral grows by itself. You are making these patterns on purpose." "Why?" Jake paused in his weaving to look at her. "Because this is how the jungle grows. Nothing here is straight or perfect. Everything curves and flows and adapts. I am not making a human building or an alien building. I am making a jungle building." Zelothy watched him work for a while. She saw how he would add a vine here, a branch there, always responding to what the structure needed. It was like watching a garden grow, but faster and with purpose. As the day wore on, Jake's shelter began to take shape. But it was not a shape that anyone would recognize. The walls curved and twisted like living wood. The roof was not flat or peaked, but flowed like a wave. Gaps and holes appeared in strange places, but Jake left them there on purpose. The other cadets thought the gaps were mistakes. They expected Jake to fill them in or cover them up. But Jake knew better. Those gaps were where the wind would flow through. They would keep the air moving inside the shelter, preventing it from getting too hot or too stuffy. Jake also began working with mud, but not the way his classmates expected. He did not slap it on thick like plaster. Instead, he mixed it with different things he had found in the jungle. Long grass fibers made it stretchy. Crushed leaves made it sticky. Tiny pebbles made it rough and strong. He painted this mud mixture onto his woven walls in thin layers. Each layer was different, mixed for the exact spot where he put it. Where water might run down, he made the mud more waterproof. Where air needed to flow, he made it more porous. Where the structure needed extra strength, he made it thicker and harder. The work was not fast, but it was steady. Jake moved like he was dancing with the jungle itself. He would pause to listen to the wind, to feel how the air moved, to watch how the water flowed. Then he would adjust his work to match what he learned. Other cadets came to watch as word spread about Jake's unusual methods. Some were curious, others were critical. A few seemed worried that Jake might actually succeed with his strange approach. "He is not following any known building techniques," one cadet said. "How can it work?" "It looks like something an animal would make," said another. "Not proper engineering at all." But Jake was not bothered by their comments. He had learned from watching animals. Birds knew how to build nests that were light but strong. Spiders knew how to make webs that could bend without breaking. Bees knew how to create structures that were both beautiful and functional. As evening came, Jake began adding the finishing touches to his shelter. He wove a thick mat of leaves for the roof, but not in flat layers like shingles. Instead, he layered them in overlapping curves that would shed water naturally. He used broad leaves on the outside for protection and smaller ones on the inside for comfort. He also created channels in the mud walls that would guide rainwater away from the shelter. These channels were not straight ditches, but curved paths that would slow the water down and spread it out. The water would not erode his walls, but would help keep them strong. By the time the sun set, Jake's shelter was nearly finished. It looked like it had grown from the jungle itself. The walls blended with the trees. The roof curved like a hill. The entrance was positioned to catch the evening breeze, but avoid the morning sun. Inside, the shelter was surprisingly spacious. The curved walls created more room than straight walls would have. The woven structure was strong but light. The mud coating kept out rain but let air flow through. Jake stood outside his shelter and looked at it with satisfaction. It was not perfect, but it was ready. Tomorrow would bring the final test, and Jake felt confident that his jungle building would protect him from whatever weather came. In the distance, he could hear his classmates still working by lamplight, trying to fix their failing structures. But Jake was done. He had built something new, something that belonged to this world. Now he would rest and wait for the storm that was surely coming. Jake woke up before dawn to the sound of wind in the trees. The air felt heavy and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Dark clouds covered the sky, blocking out the stars. The jungle was unusually quiet, as if all the animals knew something big was coming. He crawled out of his shelter and looked around. The wind was getting stronger by the minute. Leaves and small branches were starting to fall from the trees. In the distance, he could see flashes of lightning, though the thunder had not reached them yet. Jake checked his shelter one more time. He pushed gently on the walls to make sure they were secure. He tested the roof to see if it would hold. Everything felt strong and flexible, ready to bend with the storm instead of breaking against it. Instructor Valtar's voice boomed across the jungle from a loudspeaker. "Attention, cadets. Weather sensors show a major storm approaching. This storm is much stronger than we expected. You have 1 hour to make final preparations before the test begins." Jake could hear his classmates moving around in the gray morning light. Their voices sounded worried and rushed. He walked quietly through the jungle to see how they were doing. Crickshaw was working frantically on her crystal dome. She had rebuilt it again during the night, but Jake could already see new cracks forming. The humid air was making her crystals weak and brittle. She was using all her power to try to hold the structure together, but her crystal body was getting dimmer with exhaustion. "It will hold," she kept saying to herself. "It must hold. Crystal is eternal. Crystal is strong." But Jake could see that her dome was more fragile than ever. The geometric perfection that looked so beautiful was also its weakness. When one part failed, the stress would spread to every other part. The whole structure would collapse like a house of cards. Nagram had given up on his flooded hole completely. He was now building a square hut above ground, using thick branches and mud, but he was still thinking like a tunnel builder. His walls were thick and heavy, designed to hold back tons of dirt. The soft jungle ground could not support so much. Wait, The whole structure was slowly sinking into the mud. Must be stronger, now Graham muttered as he added more branches to his walls. Must be thicker, must not fall. But the more he added, the heavier his shelter became. Jake could see that it would sink completely before the storm even hit. Now Graham was trapped by his own need to build the way his people had always built. Zelithy had made the most progress of the 3 aliens. She had woven a small shelter from flexible branches, almost like a basket turned upside down. It was not the coral palace she had originally planned, but it looked like it might actually work. The plants finally started to listen, she told Jake when she saw him watching. Not to my water songs, but to something else. I think they have their own music. Jake nodded. Every place has its own songs. You just had to learn to hear them. Zelithy's shelter was the best of the 3 alien attempts, but Jake could see problems with it too. She had built it too close to the stream. When the heavy rains came, the water level would rise. Her shelter would flood, just like Graham's hole had done. The wind was getting stronger now. Jake could hear it roaring through the tops of the tall trees. Thunder rumbled in the distance, getting closer with each flash of lightning. The storm would be here soon. Jake went back to his own shelter and crawled inside. The curved walls felt solid around him. The woven roof looked strong enough to shed rain, but flexible enough to bend with the wind. He had done everything he could do. Now he had to trust that his jungle building would protect him. The first drops of rain began to fall. They were big, heavy drops that hit the leaves with loud splashing sounds. Within minutes, the gentle drops became a steady rainfall. Within an hour, the steady rain became a downpour. Jake listened to the rain hitting his roof. The water ran off in streams, following the channels he had built into the leaf layers. None of it leaked through to the inside. The curved shape of the roof made the water flow away quickly. Instead of pooling up, the wind grew stronger and stronger. Jake could hear trees creaking and groaning outside. Branches crashed to the ground with loud thuds. But his shelter just swayed gently with the wind, like a tree itself. Then came the real test. A massive gust of wind hit the jungle with the force of a giant's fist. Jake felt his shelter bend and twist, but it did not break. The flexible walls absorbed the wind's energy and then sprang back into shape. The curved design let the wind flow around the shelter instead of hitting it straight on. Through the storm noise, Jake heard a sharp cracking sound from the direction of Crickshaw's dome. Then came a crash as something heavy fell. Her crystal shelter had finally shattered under the storm's assault. Jake hoped she had found somewhere safe to hide. Another crash came from Graham's direction. His heavy hut had probably collapsed under its own weight, made worse by the rain soaking into all that thick mud. The sound was followed by angry shouting in the Thrazak language. Even Zelithy's shelter was in trouble. Jake could hear water rushing where her shelter stood. The stream was flooding, just as he had feared. Her basket-like structure might be strong enough for the wind, but it could not survive being underwater. The storm raged for hours. Rain poured down like a waterfall. Wind howled like a living thing. Lightning split the sky with blinding flashes, followed by thunder that shook the ground. But inside his shelter, Jake stayed dry and safe. The mud walls kept the rain out while still letting air flow through. The woven structure bent and swayed, but never broke. The natural drainage channels carried water away from the foundation. Jake even found the storm beautiful in its own way. The sound of rain on leaves was like music. The way his shelter moved with the wind was like dancing. He was not fighting against the storm, but riding it out in harmony. As the hours passed, Jake noticed something amazing. His shelter was actually getting stronger during the storm. The plant fibers in his mud walls were swelling with water, making them tighter and more waterproof. The vines in his woven walls were becoming more flexible as they got wet, able to bend further without snapping. The organic materials he had chosen were not just surviving the storm. They were thriving in it, just like the living jungle around them. They were designed by nature to handle this kind of weather. Finally, as the sun began to set, the storm started to weaken. The wind died down from a roar to a whisper. The rain changed from a flood to a sprinkle. The lightning moved away toward the horizon. Jake crawled out of his shelter and looked around. The jungle looked different after the storm. Many trees had fallen. The ground was covered with broken branches and torn leaves. Small streams ran everywhere, carrying away the excess water, but his shelter stood unchanged. It looked like it had always been part of the jungle, like it had grown there naturally. The storm had not damaged it at all. If anything, it looked more settled and secure than before. In the distance, Jake could see his classmates emerging from whatever hiding places they had found. They looked tired and wet and defeated. Their carefully planned shelters lay in ruins around them. The test was over, and the results were clear. Only one shelter had survived the storm intact. Only one cadet had truly succeeded in building a home that could thrive in the jungle of Verdania Prime. The morning after the storm was bright and clear. The air smelled fresh and clean, washed by hours of heavy rain. Steam rose from the wet jungle as the sun heated the soaked ground. Birds began to sing again, celebrating the return of calm weather. Jake crawled out of his shelter and stretched in the warm sunlight. He felt rested and comfortable, as if he had spent the night in a cozy bedroom instead of riding out a fierce storm. His clothes were dry, his body was warm, and his shelter showed no damage at all. Around the jungle, his classmates were emerging from caves, hollow logs, and other emergency hiding places. They looked miserable. Their clothes were soaked and muddy. Their faces showed exhaustion and disappointment. None of their carefully built shelters had survived the storm. Cricksha sat beside the scattered pieces of her crystal dome. The beautiful geometric structure had shattered into thousands of fragments that now sparkled uselessly in the morning sun. Her own crystal body looked dull and cracked, drained from trying to hold her creation together against impossible forces. Nagram stood in the ruins of his collapsed hut. The heavy walls had sunk so deep into the soft ground that only the top edges showed above the mud. All his hard work had been swallowed by the very earth he had tried to build upon. His forearms hung limp with defeat. Zelothi was pulling water, plants out of her flooded shelter. The stream had risen during the storm and swept away everything she had built. Her basket-like structure had been strong enough to resist the wind, but the water had torn it apart and carried the pieces downstream. The sound of aircraft engines filled the air. 3 Academy transports landed in the clearing where the cadets had first arrived. Instructor Veltar stepped out of the lead ship, followed by several other Academy officials. They had come to see the results of the survival test. Veltar looked around at the storm damage with his yellow eyes. Fallen trees lay everywhere. The ground was torn up by rushing water. The jungle looked like a battlefield after a great war. Cadets, report on your shelters, Veltar commanded in his deep voice. Cricksha spoke first, her voice quiet with shame. Sir, my crystal dome failed. The humidity weakened my materials, and the storm shattered them completely. Nagram was next. Sir, my underground shelter flooded, so I built above ground. But the structure was too heavy for the soft soil. It collapsed during the storm. Zelothi's voice was barely a whisper. Sir, my woven shelter was destroyed by floodwater. I built too close to the stream. Veltar nodded grimly. 3 failures out of 4 cadets. This was the worst result in the history of the survival course. Then he turned to Jake. Cadet Martinez, report on your shelter. Jake pointed to his structure, which still stood perfectly intact among the 3 trees. "Sir, my shelter survived the storm with no damage. It kept me dry and safe throughout the night." Veltar stared at Jake's creation with disbelief. The other Academy officials moved closer to examine it. They walked around the shelter, looking at it from every angle. They pushed on the walls to test their strength. They climbed up to inspect the roof construction. "This is impossible," said Dr. Kenthara, the Academy's chief survival instructor. She was a tall, thin alien with silver skin and large black eyes. "No shelter built from organic materials should survive a storm of that magnitude." "Perhaps the human used Forbidden's technology," suggested Commander Thexqui, the Academy's engineering officer. "He was built like a walking tank, with thick armor plating instead of skin. We should scan for hidden devices." They brought out their instruments and scanned Jake's shelter from top to bottom. They found no technology, no hidden supports, no Forbidden's materials. Everything was exactly what it appeared to be: vines, mud, leaves, and branches, woven and shaped by hand. "The construction methods are completely unknown," Dr. Kenthara said, studying her scanner readings. "This does not match any building technique in our databases." Jake spoke up. "Sir, I did not use any known technique. I watched how the jungle builds itself and tried to copy that." The instructors looked confused. "The jungle does not build," Commander Thexqui said. "Only intelligent beings can build. Plants and animals just grow randomly." "With respect, sir," Jake said carefully, "I think they do build. They just build differently than we do. They build with the environment instead of against it." To prove his point, Jake led them to a bird's nest in a nearby tree. The nest was perfectly round and completely waterproof, built from twigs and mud using techniques very similar to Jake's shelter. He showed them a spider's web that had survived the storm by bending with the wind instead of resisting it. "Every creature here knows how to build for this environment," Jake explained. "I just had to learn their lessons." The Academy officials spent the rest of the morning studying Jake's shelter in detail. They took measurements and photographs. They tested the strength of his woven walls and the waterproofing of his mud coating. They examined how his drainage channels worked and how his curved roof shed rain got. What they discovered amazed them. Jake's shelter was not just functional, it was elegant. Every part worked together perfectly. The structure was strong but light, waterproof but breathable, rigid but flexible. It was better engineered than many buildings made with advanced technology. "The design principles are revolutionary," Dr. Kenthara admitted. "Instead of imposing artificial structures on the environment, this method creates buildings that are part of the ecosystem." More Academy officials arrived throughout the day. Word of Jake's success had spread quickly through the galactic military network. Experts in engineering, biology, and environmental science came to study his techniques. They interviewed Jake for hours, asking him to explain every detail of his construction process. How did he choose which vines to use? How did he know where to place the drainage channels? How did he test the strength of his materials? Jake tried to explain, but his methods did not translate well into technical language. He had not used mathematical formulas or engineering principles. He had used observation, intuition, and adaptation. He had listened to what the jungle was telling him and responded accordingly. "It is not a system that can be easily taught," admitted Professor Yeldon, the Academy's leading expert on survival techniques. "It requires a fundamental change in how we think about building and engineering." But the Academy officials were determined to learn. They documented everything about Jake's shelter and began planning how to incorporate his techniques into their curriculum. They realized that their advanced civilization had forgotten something important about survival and adaptation. As the evaluation continued, Jake's classmates watched with growing amazement. They had thought his methods were primitive and foolish. Now they saw Academy experts treating his work like a great scientific discovery. "I was wrong about you," Cricksha said quietly. "Your way is not primitive. It is ... different. Advanced in ways I did not understand." Nagram nodded with all four of his arms. "The hive mind knowledge of my people could not solve this problem. But your individual thinking found an answer we never considered." Zalathai looked thoughtful. "You learned the jungle's own songs. That is something even my people, who sing to the sea, never thought to try." As the sun began to set, Instructor Veltar called the cadets together for the final evaluation. The results were clear and undisputed. Jake had not just passed the survival test, he had achieved something unprecedented. His shelter had not merely survived the storm, it had thrived in it. "Cadet Martinez," Veltar announced formally, "you have demonstrated survival skills beyond anything we have seen before. You will graduate with the highest honors, and your techniques will be studied and taught throughout the galactic fleet." Jake felt proud but also humble. He had succeeded not by being superior to his classmates, but by being willing to learn from the world around him. His human ability to adapt and observe had served him well, but he knew he could not have done it without the lessons the jungle had taught him. The survival course was over, but Jake's real education was just beginning. His success had opened new possibilities for how intelligent beings could live and work in harmony with natural environments. The galaxy was about to learn some very old lessons about the value of adaptation, observation, and working with nature instead of against it.